Hello and welcome to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. And today's topic, as you should see represented in cartoon form on your screens now, and that is titled Trump Announces Ceasefire with Iran and Holds Peace Talks in Pakistan. That is the topic for today's stream. President Trump, as is depicted in this political cartoon, holding up a peace flag in the middle of missiles coming from both Iran and Israel towards each other. The president there in the middle holding up a white flag. It is indeed accurate. President Trump has announced peace talks with Iran. Those peace talks accompany a 5-day ceasefire, and the peace talks are set to be held in Pakistan, a surprising choice of intermediary for some. Nevertheless, regulars here at the Warrior Creed live stream will not be surprised at all with Pakistan as the choice of the host country to host the peace talks between the US and Iran. Pakistan, with its mutual defense pact, provides a nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia, has very close ties with President Trump, and is a neighbor to Iran and enjoys cordial ties with them. Ideally situated geographically, militarily, as well as diplomatically, Pakistan is to host peace talks between the US and Iran. President Trump is striking an incredibly optimistic tone, and the Iranians are denying that any of it is true. The Iranians are yet to officially confirm President Trump's multiple announcements that not only has he initiated peace talks, but that they are making very good progress. Indeed, President Trump has also sent mediators over to Pakistan, Steve Witkoff, as well as Jared Kushner, and Vice President Vance are all reported to either be speaking to the Pakistanis or are heading over to Pakistan or are already on their way to Pakistan. So all of this coming up in the course of this live stream. Stay with us. We'll be returning to you just after the introductory credits. Again, you're listening to the Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to the Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. President Trump has announced ceasefire talks with Iran in Pakistan. That is the topic for today's stream. We'll be bringing you all the details on that with all of the various and conflicting reports around the Iranian position to that. But it does nevertheless appear so far to be the case. As depicted in this political cartoon, President Trump has announced not only a 5-day ceasefire in strikes. The Israelis, by the way, are yet to announce their own ceasefire in strikes, though they have, via the Prime Minister Netanyahu, confirmed the validity of Trump's announcement that there are indeed potential ceasefire agreements to be made. But the Israelis have said, in the meanwhile, while the Americans hold off on their fire for 5 days, that the Israelis, in particular in Lebanon, will continue with their strikes in their attempts to defeat the Iranian proxy Hezbollah militia in Lebanon. Nevertheless, this is incredibly encouraging and optimistic news. The Americans have not only announced a ceasefire, but have actually, according to reports, Vice President J.D. Vance is on his way to Pakistan. So that is looking to be accurate. The news of the fact that this is happening. And we're showing you now on your screens the White House announcement directly from the horse's mouth. And we can expand that for you on your screens so you can see it, and we'll read it for you as well. This is, of course, developing as we stream. And there you should be able to see it. The White House announced President Donald J. Trump calls for a pause on all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. And here is a post that Trump posted himself announcing this pause, and we'll read for you from President Trump's Truth Social account. He said, "I am," all in capital letters, by the way, every single word is in capital letters. Very interesting. "I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last 2 days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue throughout the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump." It appears quite conclusive there from what we just read you, that certainly on the American side, they're going all in on the existence of these peace talks. Trump, the president, and everybody around him, the vice president, all his negotiators, appear to be all in with the fact these peace talks are real and they are happening and they are detailed. The White House has also posted video of Trump confirming as much. President Trump provides an update on negotiations with Iran. He says they want very much to make a deal. We'd like to make a deal too. Looking quite optimistic. We'll play this video clip of Trump for you saying exactly that.
Had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict. And I think it'll end it very, very substantially. We have very much in mind our partners in the Middle East. We've had great relationships with a lot of them, as you know. A lot of them were surprisingly hit, and I was surprised to see it, and so was everyone else. But we have, they're very much in mind in the discussions. So the discussions took place yesterday. They went into yesterday evening. They want very much to make a deal. We'd like to make a deal too. We're going to get together today. By probably phone, because it's very hard to find a country. It's very hard for them to get out, I guess. But we'll at some point very, very soon meet. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Now, that's sounding very optimistic. No doubt everybody listening will agree. President Trump, at least from his end, appears to believe the talks are going rather well. That last line, that if they don't carry on and the talks don't proceed, that last line that we'll just bomb them however we like until they do agree, is precisely, if you recall, our regulars will know this, the analysis that we've held to from the first day of these strikes. If you go back to the first Radical Dispatch on these strikes, and indeed last week's as well. We've got last week's here for you. Israel kills Iran's security chief, paramilitary head, and intelligence minister in succession. Last week, we stated exactly that. As you heard Trump say at the end of this clip we just played you, if the Iranians don't end up reaching an agreement with us in these talks, we'll just resume bombing them. This is precisely the strategic interventions approach that we've said the Americans are pursuing in last week's stream. Take a listen to this. The Muslim Arab Gulf countries will not take kindly to being bombed by Iran, even though they did not join the war to start with, but not least because they bombed them. Iran bombed its neighbors, its Muslim neighbors, in the middle of Ramadan. And they somehow expected Muslims to rally behind them while they were bombing Muslims in the middle of Ramadan. All that's happened is that the Sunni Muslim Arabs surrounding Iran have decided that it's Iran who is their enemy because Israel isn't bombing them. Iran is. I mean, it's quite a no-brainer. It's quite obvious what they're upset about. And this is why Iran stands isolated in the region. And it's why nobody's coming to help the Iranian regime, and there will be no Russians, there will be no Chinese. President Trump, the Americans and the Israelis have as long as they like bombing Iran until they decide to stop. And this is a horrible thing for the Iranian people. It is a horrible thing for those innocent people inside Iran. But the regime in Iran is going to be at the mercy of the Americans and the Israelis. Whenever they elect a leader who decides to talk and cut a deal with Trump, this will stop. They will probably need to join the Gaza Peace Board. And as you can see, what we said there last week, that President Trump and the Israelis will have as long as they like to keep bombing Iran until Iran agrees to talk. This week, that appears to be exactly what's happened. Peace talks have been announced, and Pakistan is the country that is mediating. And here you can see the Financial Times reporting on the 23rd of March. Pakistan steps up as a go-between in Trump's Iran crisis. Now, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, has confirmed that the Pakistanis are involved in these peace negotiations. There is Shehbaz Sharif's post on socials. He says, Pakistan welcomes and fully supports ongoing efforts to pursue dialogue to end the war in Middle East in the interest of peace and stability in region and beyond. Subject to concurrence by the US and Iran, Pakistan stands ready and honored to be the host to facilitate meaningful and conclusive talks for a comprehensive settlement of the ongoing conflict. Now, that post there by the Prime Minister of Pakistan was indeed reposted by President Trump himself, appearing to endorse on the American side the Pakistani role as mediators in this conflict. The Iranians, again, somewhat less open about what they're up to. That's perfectly normal, as we're going to get to later on in this stream. The Iranian denial of these peace talks and then their silence as to whether or not they're participating is part of the course when it comes to their attitude and approach when it comes to agreeing in such peace negotiations. But we'll get to that in a moment. That is the Prime Minister of Pakistan there, Shehbaz Sharif, stating openly that they are playing a role in mediating between Iran and America. And President Trump, as we said, reposted that Prime Minister of Pakistan's post there. Insider Paper reports here as well, breaking, a Pakistani official has said that the US Vice President J.D. Vance, White House envoy Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Kushner were expected to meet Iranian officials in Islamabad this week, following a call between Trump and Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir. Now, that is the latest to that news is that it is reported that J.D. Vance is actually on his way already to Pakistan. So it looks quite certain that these talks are happening. And the role that Pakistan is playing in these peace negotiations and the ability Pakistan has managed to accrue to itself in acting as a credible mediator between conflicting parties is something that we forecast on day one of this conflict being initiated by America and Israel against Iran. When we appeared on GB News America with Bev Turner, we specifically named Pakistan as the nuclear guarantor to Saudi Arabia's defense as something to watch out for when it comes to this conflict. We're going to play that clip for you again right now.
You've been saying for, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least a year now that you think you were looking at a grand regional settlement. You think the Middle East is about to enter a period of prolonged peace, the likes of which we've probably not seen. Well, I've not seen, we've not seen in our lifetime. Is that looking more likely or less likely tonight, Majid?
Well, I'm going to say something counterintuitive, but you probably could predict my answer, Bev. I think it's looking more likely. And the reasons for that is that one of the unintended consequences of Iran's calculated escalation, Iran deliberately escalated by attacking Sunni Muslim Arab Gulf countries who were not involved. Saudi Arabia had prohibited the US from using its air bases prior to this attack, which is why they're so upset with what Iran did. So their calculated escalation was done in order to drag everybody else into the war, because when they're fighting for their existential existence, it suits them to have as many parties for and against them in the war, because if you broaden the conflict, Russia gets involved, Iran has more supporters and therefore more chance of surviving. So that's what they tried to do. What's happened instead is because of the Pakistani, Saudi, Turkey joint military defense pact, when Saudi has said now that it would support the US in any war effort necessary because they're so upset with what Iran literally bombed them, right? So Saudi has said to America, we will support you by any means necessary. That drags in nuclear Pakistan because of the defense pact they signed about 6 months ago. Now, when you end up with that kind of escalation, Iran, I think, miscalculated here. The only option left, and they are logical people, Persians can be very logical, right? The only option left does mean come to terms in a post-Khomeini context and agree a peace deal. I do think that's what's going to happen. Iran cannot oppose countries such as Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia when they come together, as they have done, in a mutual defense pact. It's just too much for Iran to deal with.
And there you have it, folks. Those of you who will remember, that was on the first night of strikes as they were initially occurring. We pretty much said this was going to unfold in the following way. That's how it's unfolding right now as we speak, live on air. And that was, of course, for GB News America with Beverly Turner. Bev will, of course, remember that forecast and will be watching herself as these events unfold. Pakistan hosting mediation talks between the US and Iran. Iran found itself in a quagmire. Iran found itself having overreached and having miscalculated by striking at the GCC Sunni Muslim Arab countries. Iran miscalculated. Whereas it thought it would be expanding the theater of war in order to drag everybody else into the conflict, thus widening the parties to the war, in a hope that Russia then is forced to join, which increases the chances of Iran's survival. That is why Iran decided to initiate their very own Samson option by striking at all of their neighbors. Indeed, it backfired. Instead of the war being expanded, the GCC Sunni Muslim Arab Gulf countries showed incredible restraint. They did not join the war. Of course, Iran even struck Turkey, hoping that Turkey and thereby NATO would be dragged into the war. But the Sunni Muslim Arab and non-Arab Sunni Muslim countries showed incredible restraint, did not strike back at Iran. In the end, it fell upon Pakistan to exercise and flex its own muscles via its nuclear deterrent and to pressure the Iranians to come to terms, exactly as we said would happen in the clip you just saw. And that is exactly as Middle East Eye now reports. This is on your screens. We'll read it for you. The Pakistans have specifically been telling the Iranians that reminding them of their nuclear mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia. So the headline there you can see, Saudi analyst says kingdom, Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, will activate defense pact with Pakistan if it joins Iran war. To read from that Middle East Eye article reported on the 18th of March, Saudi Arabia has so far relied on Pakistan to mediate with Iran. Pakistani Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar said earlier this month that he had directly raised the defense pact in conversations with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. We have a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, and I conveyed this to the Iranian side, Dar said, adding that Tehran responded by seeking assurances that Saudi territory would not be used as a launchpad for attacks against Iran. In addition to its diplomatic and defense ties with Saudi Arabia, Pakistan is relying on the Gulf for crude oil and natural gas. This week, the Pakistan-flagged ship, the Karachi, also known as the Lorax, became the first vessel carrying non-Iranian crude to transit through the Strait of Hormuz, with its ship tracking data called the Automatic Identification System on. The vessel belongs to Pakistan's state-owned National Shipping Corporation, and its oil was from the UAE. Analysts say Pakistan likely negotiated transit with Iran's government. So it clearly looks like that the Pakistanis are in a unique position. The Iranians let their ships through the Strait of Hormuz carrying and laden with the oil of the country they're bombing, the UAE. But the Pakistanis were given permission to go through the Strait of the Hormuz. The Pakistanis have the ear of Trump, having previously joined his Gaza peace board and having praised President Trump as a peacemaker. Trump himself trusts the Pakistanis as interlocutors. He has said so many times, specifically naming the Chief of Army Staff, Asim Munir of Pakistan, as somebody he is incredibly impressed with. So Trump has great relations with the Pakistanis. The Iranians clearly, as you've just heard, have great relations to the extent where the Pakistani oil carrying ship was the only one that was allowed through by the Iranians through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, the Gulf countries led by Saudi Arabia have not only good ties with Pakistan, but in fact, a mutual defense pact, which makes them a NATO-like Middle Eastern ally to Pakistan. It's ideally placed, therefore, as a country to not only host these talks, but to get good results. And here are the Saudis effectively saying so themselves. Saudi political analyst openly confirms on Canadian TV that there is literally a Pakistani nuclear umbrella protecting Saudi Arabia. Take a look at this.
Sound get triggered.
Yeah.
Pakistan is a nuclear nation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And we have this agreement right now with Pakistan. It's a mutual defense agreement, and there is, like we can say it literally, that there is a nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia, a Pakistani nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia, and we appreciate Pakistan, and that does not mean we are not, or that does not mean that we are actually moving away from our strategic partners like the United States and Europe, etc. No, Saudi Arabia is just diversifying its strategic relations. Definitely, Pakistan has been always a steadfast partner and ally of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And what happens in Pakistan affects us, and what happens in Saudi Arabia affects the Pakistanis. And I think...
You mentioned about...
Very, very, very candid there, straightforward, saying there is a nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia. That is a huge deterrent for the Iranians. And the Iranians now will be feeling somewhat isolated, but more on that in a moment. For the meanwhile, the Iranians, it is fair to say, there have been mixed messages coming from Iran as to the veracity of the claims around these peace talks, but that is quite normal. We wish to reassure our regulars and those newly joining us that denying peace talks while peace talks are going on is quite normal. That doesn't mean, in fact, that the peace talks aren't going on. Now, the Times reports from the headline there, you can see it on your screens. That's the Times of London. They've reported Witkoff travels to Pakistan in hope of in-person talks with Iran. And of course, we've just stated that the latest reports are that JD Vance, the vice president, has also headed to Pakistan. To quote from that article, President Trump stepped back from the brink yesterday after threatening to destroy Iran's power infrastructure unless it reopened the Strait of Hormuz, as he insisted there were very good discussions on ending the war. The Times has been told that Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, has traveled to Pakistan, which has offered to host in-person talks. There is, however, so far, no sign of any meaningful Iranian figure joining him there. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, the man identified by Trump allies as a potential interlocutor in Tehran, strongly rejected the suggestion of any talks, either direct or indirect. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf wrote on X, no negotiations have been held with the US, and fake news is used to manipulate the financial and oil markets and escape the quagmire in which the US and Israel are trapped. He added that Iran demanded complete and remorseful punishment of the aggressors. So the funny thing is that, as you just heard there, the man tipped by American sources close to Trump in the media as being the man they're actually holding these peace talks with, and that is the Speaker of Iran's parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, has on Twitter at least openly denied that these talks are taking place and that this is all fake news. However, there is reason, and there are reasons to feel reassured that Trump is telling the truth. He says, Trump has personally said, we're dealing with a man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It is not the supreme leader. Nobody's heard from him, and we don't know if he's living. But Trump has doubled down on this notion that they are indeed speaking to somebody on the Iranian regime side. And it is unlikely, this is our radical media's view, it is unlikely that President Trump is making this up, or indeed that this is fake news. It's highly likely that this is the case. Take a listen to this.
Go to this breaking story.
We've wiped out the leadership phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with the man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody.
Is that the Supreme Leader?
No, not the Supreme Leader. We don't. Well, nobody heard of the second Supreme Leader, the son.
Are these direct?
Nobody. We have not heard from the son. Every once in a while, you'll see a statement made, but we haven't. We don't know if he's living. But the people that seem to be running it, and they seem that based on really fact, because things they've said have taken place.
So there you have it. From that and what you just heard there, the verification that the people that seem to be running the regime, and then they say things and then things happen as they say them, indicating they are in fact in charge, that clearly President Trump will have his own vetting and verification of such tests as to see if he's speaking indeed to the people that are actually in charge. Clearly, the Americans aren't stupid. They've done their due diligence. It appears to them, at least, that they're relatively certain that they are speaking to the right people who are in charge in Iran. It's highly unlikely that this is false information from the President of the United States of America. And there's Politico reinforcing the point. He's a hot option. The White House eyes Iran's parliament speaker as a potential US-backed leader. Now, whether it's the parliament speaker or not, there's certainly somebody they're speaking to. But let's just read from that Politico article. This is on your page now. The Trump administration is quietly weighing Iran's parliament speaker as a potential partner and even a future leader. As the president signals a shift from military pressure toward a negotiated endgame. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the 64-year-old who has repeatedly threatened the US and its allies with retaliation, is seen by at least some in the White House as a workable partner who could lead Iran and negotiate with the Trump administration in the war's next phase, according to two administration officials. But the White House isn't ready to commit to any one person, hoping to stress test multiple candidates as they look for someone willing to make a deal, said the two people, both granted anonymity to describe internal thinking. He's a hot option, one administration official said. That's talking of the parliamentary speaker in Iran. He's a hot option, cautioning that no decisions have been made. He's one of the highest, but we got to test them and we can't rush into it. So it's quite clear through multiple briefings, they are speaking to someone. They're not 100% reliably telling us definitively who that someone is. The hints are it's the Speaker of Parliament. He's denied that it's him. Of course he would. That would be quite normal in such context because he's likely to also be assassinated. Of course, it's a very sensitive and delicate situation. But there is certainly, it appears to be the case that somebody is speaking to somebody. Al Arabiya English has reported. This is on your screens now as well. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has told US envoy Steve Witkoff that Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei approved talks and a potential deal. Al Arabiya reports, citing Israeli newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth. Now, again, that guy, the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, is another potential candidate that the Trump administration could mean when they say they're speaking to somebody higher up. It could be the Speaker of Parliament. It could be the Foreign Minister. The Speaker of Parliament may have been named to throw people off the scent that it's the Foreign Minister, or vice versa. They are, in fact, speaking to somebody, but as to who that somebody is, for understandable reasons, will be revealed in due course and not necessarily straight away. And here is Al Jazeera English's take on events as we've described them.
On board, we're going to bring in John Hendren in Washington, D.C. And John, despite Iran denying that these talks are happening, the White House seems confident that progress is being made. Is it clear, though, who the U.S. is actually talking to in these negotiations?
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump hasn't said who those good and productive talks he's been referring to have been with. Usually the U.S. deals with intermediaries in other Middle Eastern countries. But an Israeli official did tell Axios that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, two intermediaries for the U.S. administration, have been in touch with the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. And although he has denied any direct contact, the U.S. is said, through U.S. officials talking to U.S. media, is said to be looking for a Delcy Rodriguez character. That's the vice president in Venezuela who, after Nicolas Maduro, the president, was captured by the U.S., she cut a deal with the U.S. that included giving oil to the U.S. in order to form a peace agreement between the two countries. And these talks led Trump to announce a 5-day pause in attacks on Iranian energy infrastructure. That just happens to be about the amount of time it takes for thousands of Marines to arrive in that area. Whether that's a coincidence or not is not clear. Trump made this announcement before the markets opened, so stocks went up and oil prices went down. That achieved one goal of his. So he might be sincere. There is speculation that he might be backing down from his threat to attack Iran's energy infrastructure, that he was just trying to calm markets. Or it could simply be strategic ambiguity, an effort to keep Iran off its balance as to what the U.S. endgame is.
Okay, thanks so much, John, for all of that. John Hendren for us in Washington, D.C.
The key takeaway there is that 5 days is just enough time to send in a whole bunch of US Marines. Now, we began our commentary on the first night of these strikes by stating that it was unlikely that there would be US ground forces deployed. We hold by that view. It is unlikely that the US will send in ground forces in the form of US Marines, though it is important, as again you just heard, that President Trump not reveal his hand. So, of course, sending in the ground forces, the troops, while negotiating with the Iranians over the course of these 5 days may well occur. The US Marines may well end up being positioned where they are ready to be deployed, and hopefully it won't come to that. Of course, as we stated at the start of this stream, and as we have been from the beginning, if the Iranians don't end up being able to make a deal with Trump, he'll just bomb them until somebody does appear to lead the country and is willing to strike a deal with Trump. That is how this was always going to unfold. The Iranians stand isolated, both from their neighbors and also from their superpower allies, such as Russia and China, who have decidedly and decisively not stepped in to support Iran. In fact, the vote at the United Nations condemning Iran's attack on the GCC countries was a unanimous vote, which means Russia and China also voted to tell Iran to stop bombing its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors. They have not come to support Iran. Now, here's Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu confirming his view that the negotiations are ongoing. He said earlier today, I spoke with our friend, President Trump. President Trump believes there's an opportunity to leverage the tremendous achievements we have reached alongside the US military to realize the goals of the war through an agreement that will safeguard our vital interests. So here is Benjamin Netanyahu confirming from his end, from the Israeli side, that talks have been initiated.
מוקדם יותר היום שוחחתי עם ידידנו הנשיא טראמפ. הנשיא טראמפ מאמין שיש סיכוי למנף את ההישגים הכבירים של צה"ל וצבא ארצות הברית כדי לממש את יעדי המלחמה בהסכם, הסכם שישמור על האינטרסים החיוניים שלנו. במקביל, אנחנו ממשיכים לתקוף גם באיראן וגם בלבנון. אנחנו קודשים את תוכנית הטילים ותוכנית הגרעין הדק וממשיכים לפגוע קשות בחיזבאללה. רק לפני ימים אחדים חיסלנו עוד 2 מדעני גרעין, והיד עוד נטויה. אנחנו נשמור על האינטרסים החיוניים שלנו בכל מצב.
So there we have it. The Israelis confirming that the talks are ongoing, but also stating that they will, from their end, continue striking in Iran and Lebanon, even though the Americans have announced a halt to their strikes for 5 days. The Israelis will carry on until such a time as a universal ceasefire is agreed. But the denial of the Iranians now to that, as the Kobesi letter on Twitter, as they take the view, and we agree here, that Iranian denials of peace talks occurring is quite natural, and it happens, in fact, every time. We're just going to read for you what they've written. We firmly believe there are ongoing US-Iran peace deal talks right now. Why? Because we have seen this exact sequence of events multiple times in previous deals negotiated by President Trump. In fact, the May 2025 China trade deal followed the exact same timeline. On April 24, 2025, just 15 days after the 90-day tariff pause, which also came as the 10Y note yield soared above 4.5%, President Trump made similar claims about China, and China responded like Iran just did. Trump said that China was interested in a trade deal with the US, and China responded, stating that there are absolutely no negotiations between the US and China. Just 3 weeks later, On May the 12th, 2025, the US and China announced their first trade deal, reducing tariffs to a 30% baseline. We believe a similar situation is happening right now with Iran behind closed doors. As Iran's war strategy has become to play the long game and pressure the US and Israel through capital and energy markets, Iran does not want to lose leverage and allow markets to normalize until a definitive deal has been solidified. This is the same exact form of leverage that China had in April 2025 negotiations, which they initially denied, as the 10-year note yield broke above 4.50% and US equity markets collapsed. We believe Trump is following the same playbook now. That said, volatility will persist until there is clear agreement in place and broader market normalization. After this historic shock will take months. Pattern-based trading has become incredibly profitable over the last 12 months, and we continue to update our models as a result. Bookmark this post, keep following patterns. And there you see the headlines. Trump asserts trade talks with China are underway after Beijing denies any ongoing negotiations. And the second one from the Wall Street Journal, Iran Foreign Ministry denies talks with the US. The argument is that such denials were also made by the Chinese 3 weeks before announcing a deal. So denials in the course of diplomacy are quite normal. They have their own reasons, and that's to reassure people that, in fact, we also take the view that it is genuine. These talks are ongoing, and they will be hosted in Pakistan. And in fact, just today, as the Financial Times reports on your screens now, US President has said that Washington and Tehran had reached major points of agreement as he played up the prospects of a diplomatic end to the war in the Middle East. We're just going to play that clip for you as well. This is, again, Trump ringing the optimistic bell, and this is news from today.
Very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. Perhaps that hasn't been conveyed. The communication, as you know, has been blown to pieces. They're unable to talk to each other. But we've had very strong talks. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner had them. They went, I would say, perfectly. I would say that if they carry through with that, it'll end that problem, that conflict. And I think it'll end it very, very substantially. We have very much in mind our partners in the Middle East. We've had great relationships with a lot of them, as you know. A lot of them were surprisingly hit. And I was surprised to see it, and so was everyone else. But we have, they're very much in mind in the discussion.
So there we are, making great progress. He's saying that the Iranians may not necessarily be speaking to each other, but of course, keep in mind that they are trying to avoid being bombed and so aren't communicating with each other as well. So it's quite normal. There's some confusion on their side, but President Trump reassuring everybody that great progress has been made in these peace talks. And really, as we expected from the beginning, this war will conclude in a deal between Trump and the Iranians, paving the way for a grand regional settlement for peace. The war has always been contained. Even if you look at it from the perspective of casualties, as tragic as they are, we're placing this graphic on your screens now from Al Jazeera English. How many people have been killed or injured in US, Israeli, and Iranian attacks? If you look at this graphic here, these sorts of deaths, as tragic as every death is, are not the typical level of deaths you'd have in an all-out war. They are relatively incredibly low. If you look at the GCC countries, take a look at Saudi Arabia there, only 2 killed. Of course, 2 is too many. In the UAE, 8 killed. 8 too many, but still relatively low. In Oman, 3 killed. In Bahrain, 2 killed. In Kuwait, 6 killed. Jordan had a bit more at 28, but that's still relatively low for a war. And of course, in Iran, 1,500, because Iran is the country mainly being bombed by the US and Israel. But even 1,500 is quite low for a war, though, of course, 1,500 deaths is 1,500 too many. And Israel strikes again on Lebanon, 1,039 killed. So the countries that are being struck by the US and Israel and targeted have experienced higher casualties than the countries that Iran has decided to strike back at in its neighbors, the GCC Gulf Arab countries. But regardless, all countries you can see there, when it comes to what we'd come to expect in terms of war casualties, have suffered relatively low numbers of casualties. And that indicates something. It indicates that this war isn't an all-out war. It's a controlled series of events with symmetric responses, which is what the Iranians have also been promising that they were going to do. As the Times reports here, 23rd of March, headlined, "Is this the end of the Iran war, or is it just getting started?" This is a Times analysis. We're going to read now from that article for you, reasserting the point that this is a relatively controlled series of escalatory strikes as opposed to all-out war. Despite appearances, the Times says, and all the talk of World War III, this has not so far been a total conflict. US ground troops are on their way to the Middle East, but not in huge numbers, and they have no defined target as of yet. A full-scale invasion of Iran, even if the talks break down, looks unlikely. Civilian targets have been hit, and in the war as a whole, perhaps 1,500 to 2,000 civilians have been killed. A tragedy, but not yet the conflagrations of Syria and Gaza. In these circumstances, conflicts run according to carefully calibrated rules. Certain types of attack to achieve a set tactical purpose are met with like retaliation. Iran knows very well how to play this game, as does Israel. That's the reciprocal symmetrical attacks. It's a controlled escalation. The US is more comfortable, however, with either the assertion of overwhelming force or short, sharp policing actions. These include decapitating movements it deems terrorists with missile strikes or symbolic acts such as Trump's attack on the Assad regime in his first term in office. But you can glean there from the Times of London analysis, confirming our view that this from the beginning was going to be a controlled conflict. Military strikes, as we said, if you remember our immediate reaction to this on the first day, military strikes are not the same as all-out war. We have avoided all-out war up until today. May we long avoid it. And these are instead retaliatory symmetrical strikes by each country. And now that the peace talks have begun, we hope that we can continue to avoid all-out war. And of course, Iran has every interest to agree a ceasefire because Iran currently stands isolated. There is no strategic nor tactical win for Iran here. Of course, Iran is tactically losing, but some analysts who are pro-Iran have taken the view that it's strategically winning because it's winning the hearts and minds of the region, of the peoples of the region. It's also demonstrating a strategic ability to outlast the US. Some have even gone so far as to say that it's tactically matching the US and Israel in their ability to strike. We don't take that view. We think they're not tactically matching. I mean, they haven't managed to decapitate the entire leadership of Israel or America. There is no tactical symmetry there, but they're also not strategically winning. In fact, what strategically has happened is that Iran has succeeded through its own miscalculations in only isolating itself. On your screens now, you can see from the 1st of March, the announcement by the UAE that they are closing all embassies and cutting diplomatic ties between them and Iran. Well, it wasn't just the UAE that did that. Next there, you can see Anadolu English reporting that Saudi Arabia became the second country after Qatar to order Iranian diplomats to leave since the beginning of the war. But as we've just read, that would make it the third country because the UAE had already done that. So that's three countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, all having cut their diplomatic relations with Iran. And here, Al Jazeera English reports Lebanon has declared the appointed Iranian envoy persona non grata, asking him to leave the country by Sunday. So Lebanon as well, expelling their Iranian diplomats. The Saudis doing so, the Qataris doing so, the Emiratis doing so. Iran stands incredibly isolated in the region. And as Russia TV here reports, the Turkish foreign minister, having just returned from Riyadh, said nothing will return to how it was before the war. Things have changed forever, and we will know how to protect ourselves. And so even the Turks, realizing that Iran, by striking its neighbors, has awoken them all to the need for a mutual defense pact, a Middle Eastern NATO, which is all that Iran has achieved. It's succeeded in uniting the GCC, Gulf Arab countries, with its other Sunni Muslim non-Arabs, such as the Turks, in a mutual defense arrangement under the auspices, the protection of Pakistan's nuclear umbrella. That is the only thing Iran's attacks have achieved. That's why it is a strategic error, what Iran did. They have not won this war strategically nor tactically. Here on your screens, Al Jazeera English reporting that even the Russians are urging Iran now to succumb to these diplomatic overtures. Al Jazeera reporting Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov urges Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi to, quote, end hostilities immediately and transit towards a political and diplomatic resolution. So the Iranians appearing very isolated, everybody pressuring them to end this conflict. The Chinese, by the way, have said something similar to the Russians. They've said Iran should accept these peace negotiations and resolve the conflict. And so it is looking like that's going to be the case. The White House has reported that President Trump has said Iran has this last opportunity to end its threats to America and our allies. We hope they take it. Either way, he says, we're going to see a much safer world soon. We will just play that clip for you, all pointing to what our analysis has been for many, longer than a couple of years now, that we are headed towards a grand regional settlement for peace in the Middle East. Take a look at this.
We're systematically dismantling the regime's ability to threaten America. They're not threatening us anymore. As Commander-in-Chief, it's my sacred responsibility to protect our country from all threats. For decades, Iran refused every opportunity to renounce its nuclear ambitions, and in recent months, its own negotiators bragged to our representatives about having enough material to make nuclear weapons. And that was supposed to deter me, but it didn't deter. It made me more anxious, and it just made it much more important. This mission that we're all on together was much more important, and we did it quicker. Iran's missile capabilities were also growing so fast that it would soon have become virtually impossible to stop them. Once they have a missile, once they have what they were building was incredible. And you got a little glimpse of it by the fact that when they came out, they started shooting all of their neighbors. Their neighbors weren't fighting with them. They were getting along okay with their neighbors. And I was surprised. Everybody was surprised. And it actually worked in reverse because their neighbors then turned against them. Now Iran has one more opportunity to end its threats to America and her allies, and we hope they take it. Either way, America and the entire world will soon be much safer and will be a much more secure planet.
There you have it, President Trump stating precisely how we've understood this from day one of this particular round in this conflict, that the Iran has backfired by attacking its neighbors. They have lost the strategic long-term goodwill of the GCC countries, and President Trump stating that he thinks off the back of this, there will be a period of peace and prosperity in the Middle East. That is the grand regional settlement for peace that we believe is on the way very soon. The UAE and its presidential advisor, Anwar Gargash, according to Al Arabiya English, says Iran's attack on Gulf countries cement the Iranian threat as a central pillar of Gulf strategic thinking and will lead to the strengthening of our security partnerships with Washington, calling it the price of Iran's miscalculations. So again, confirming that Iran stands isolated. And because of its isolation, there is every reason to believe that the Iranians will end up being forced to take this deal. We wish to reassure everybody that that's what we think is going to happen. This will end in a deal being struck between President Trump and whoever survives on the Iranian side. If the person on the Iranian side doesn't want to make a deal, the Americans will resume bombing until they find somebody that does want to make a deal. The problem the Iranians have, and why we are quite certain, or quite sure at least, that they will arrive at a deal with the Americans, is that they are now leaderless, depleted, and isolated. And those three factors mean that no matter how much bravado they wish to display, no matter how much passion or zeal they may have remaining in them to want to fight, ultimately, the only conclusion, logically, is that a deal will be made. Because the Iranians have been left leaderless, and they have been left depleted in terms of their missile stockpile and isolated in the region, they will eventually have to come to terms. And primarily isolated because the Russians and the Chinese have not joined them in this war and have both urged them to agree to a deal. So they are isolated internationally, they are isolated regionally, the local Sunni Muslim Arab region, and the Sunni region generally of Muslims in the greater Middle East have all turned on Iran for sending, in the month of Ramadan, more missiles towards its Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors than they even sent to Israel, the country that attacked them. It was a huge miscalculation, which has cost Iran the strategic victory. If they hadn't have done that, Iran would have lost to America and Israel tactically, but may well have been able to claim a strategic victory, the moral high ground, the hearts and minds of the people going forward, which in the long term means they could have won in terms of the multi-generational struggle. But by grossly miscalculating in the way they did, and by sending more missiles to their Sunni Muslim Arab neighbors in the month of Ramadan than they even sent to Israel, the country that attacked them, while simultaneously expecting those Muslims to rally behind them in their call for a so-called global jihad against America and Israel, it was the most unbelievably counterproductive move for the Iranian regime to engage in. It left them isolated from the region. And as we say, because the Iranians are now leaderless, depleted, and isolated, they will have no choice in the end but to agree to terms, come to terms with President Trump under the supervision of the Pakistanis, who, again, as we've stated earlier, because of their nuclear deterrent and their good relations with the Saudis and a mutual defense pact, and their good relations with Trump having joined his Gaza Peace Board, being neighbors to Iran, having good relations with Iran too, Pakistan is ideally situated to bring this matter to a close on behalf of President Trump. So we are optimistic as always. We think we are headed towards a grand regional settlement for peace, and it is more and more likely by the day. What Trump had to say on the Strait of Hormuz, that's something we'll play for you now, because he's claimed, perhaps off the cuff, which is what it looks like, that both he and the Ayatollah would share access to the shipping lane, the key shipping lane at the Strait of Hormuz. Take a listen to what Trump had to say about that.
For medical purposes, civilian purposes?
They have. Thank you.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? Who's going to be in control of that?
That'll be opened very soon if this works.
How soon? And who's in control of it? Will Iran still be able to control the flow of oil?
Be jointly controlled.
By whom?
Maybe me. Maybe me.
You want the United States to be in
Me
control
and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is, whoever the next Ayatollah. Look, and there'll also be a form of a very serious form of a regime change. Now, in all fairness, everybody's been killed from the regime.
So he's sounding very optimistic, saying the Strait of Hormuz will be dealt with very soon if these talks succeed. It sounds like Trump thinks that matters can be wrapped up. And his demands, he's made clear in this particular clip that we're going to play for now, that Iran stop enriching uranium and hand over all the already enriched uranium. It sounds to us like these talks are very detailed, and they have gone right down to the granular detail as to what President Trump expects.
What exactly are you looking for in these talks, Mr. President?
We're looking for all of the things that we've been talking about. We want to see no nuclear bomb, no nuclear weapon, not even close to it. Low key on the missiles. We want to see peace in the Middle East. We want the nuclear dust. We're going to want that, and I think we're going to get that. We've agreed to that. Yeah, we've agreed to that.
You want the enriched uranium before you can end this.
And we want no enrichment, but we also want the enriched uranium. If this happens, it's a great start for Iran to build itself back, and it's everything that we want. And it's also great for Israel, and it's great for the other Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, all of them, Kuwait and Bahrain in particular. So it's great for all of them.
And if you note there in that particular clip, President Trump stated that they've already agreed that Iran will hand over the nuclear dust, which is the already enriched uranium. So it appears as if these talks are incredibly detailed and are making progress. It would be very highly unusual for President Trump to announce such granular details if these talks weren't at all, in fact, happening. So the Iranian denials of these talks can be taken with a pinch of salt. It does appear they're happening. We don't know exactly who they're happening with, but of course the Americans would have identified that they're not wasting their time. As you heard earlier, President Trump say that we know we're talking to people that have the power to make decisions because we've observed them saying things and then those things happening inside Iran, demonstrating to us that they do indeed have the power to make those decisions. Now, that is all we've got time for this week. But we feel that it's a very optimistic and encouraging moment. The peace talks are going ahead. Pakistan is mediating. The Iranians will end up coming to terms with President Trump. Once this conflict is resolved, the hope is that we continue moving towards the grand regional settlement for peace. If you recall, we've been saying that Iran was the only regional country not to have joined Trump's Gaza Peace Board. The Israelis even joined. Prior to the Israelis joining, the Saudis, the Pakistanis, the Indonesians, the Turks, the Qataris, even Hamas all joined Trump's Gaza Peace Board. The Iranians were the only regional country that didn't. So if they are able to sign their own peace accord with President Trump, it significantly increases the chances of having dealt with Iran's opposition to the revival of the Abraham Accords, the peace deals between Arab countries and Israel. And of course, once Iran's opposition has been removed in that way, the Abraham Accords and generally peace initiatives with Israel can be revived. The Gulf countries have stated openly that they recognize that their security is in better hands when it's with America than relying on the Iranians. They've declared, as the Emiratis have, that Iran is their enemy, not Israel, because Iran is the one striking them and bombing them, not Israel. And so they've started making it very clear that they are unhappy with Iran's position. This all increases the chances of wider regional normalization with Israel, a Sunni Muslim mutual defense pact to counterbalance Israeli nuclear capabilities, because of course Pakistani nuclear capabilities will neutralize Israeli nuclear capabilities, and we'll end up with a rising region led by Sunni Muslims in the Middle East, the NATO/American region, the Western Hemisphere. Then there will be a Russian sphere of influence and a Chinese sphere of influence. 4 regions that will be divided up. The world will be divided up into the NATO/American, Western Hemisphere, the Russian, the Chinese, and the Middle Eastern. And the emergence of the leadership of that Middle Eastern region is happening before our eyes. The Mutual Defense Pact between those Sunni Muslim countries will end up forming the cockpit, if you like, of the emerging Sunni Muslim power bloc in the Middle East. Iran has been placed back in its box. Its aspirations of wanting to lead that Middle Eastern region have firmly been rebutted. Permanently, it appears to be the case, because as you heard the Turkish Foreign Minister say on his return from Riyadh, as reported by Russian TV, we've just read for you, things will never be the same again. Those countries that Iran attacked will never trust Iran again, not to attack them, but also will never rely on other countries again for the defense. They are going to start organizing in defending their own interests. That will see the rise of a Sunni Muslim power bloc in the Middle East, a Middle Eastern NATO, and the world is rapidly changing. But it is moving towards a grand regional settlement for peace. Once those powers all balance each other, we have a return to a multipolar world as represented by these 4 regions, rather than a hegemonic power of US dominance in the world, a unipolar world. That's now being split up into a regional multipolarism, and that's with the 4 regions we've just described. And with a return to a balance of powers in that way, it significantly increases the chances of peace in the Middle East and a grand regional settlement for said peace. We thank you all for tuning in. If you go to Radical Media on majidnawaz.substack.com, you will get the written version of this stream in the form of the Radical Dispatch tomorrow. And of course, if you subscribe and become a premium paying subscriber to Radical Media on majidnawaz.substack.com, you'll gain access to the paywalled content on that Radical Dispatch, as well as the podcast version of this stream, heads up and advance notice on events, as well as special invitations, all of that behind the paywall on Radical Media. We thank our paying premium subscribers. We cannot do this work without your support, and we encourage everybody to become a premium subscriber of Radical Media, found via majidnawaz.substack.com. Until next time, this has been the Warrior Creed live stream, and you've been listening to me, the Radical Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warrior.